Hello, old friend. You've served me well. It won't be much longer now. Let's see. How do I want to start this? Dear Mom and Dad, I bring you greetings from Jerusalem in the province of Judea. I hope all is well with you both, and I hope that Claudius and Sophia are getting their lessons and helping you with the farm. Irenaeus and Anthony, they send their greetings to you as well. And, Anthony asked that you please tell his mother he is well and he misses his family. You're probably wondering why I'm writing to you from Jerusalem. A few months ago, I wondered that myself. It happened that when the legion that I was assigned to, including Irenaeus and Anthony, were transferred from the outer province to this garrison in Jerusalem. We were transferred on temporary orders to assist with crowd control because of some festival called the Passover, something that the Jews celebrate. None of us really had any idea what a Passover was, but we knew it had to be better than sleeping out in the wilderness, and we all thought it would be fun to enjoy some festivities. After all, we would be staying at the very garrison where Pilate himself stayed. The prospect of such a march to Jerusalem never excited so many soldiers. Well, all thought this would be just a chance for some much-needed rest and relaxation, and we would soon learn that, we were terribly wrong. During our march, our centurion, Cornelius, taught us about this thing called a Passover. He's been here for several years and had been in them before, and he told us that the Passover for the Jews was a celebration that commemorated the final plague on Egypt. A plague that their God had brought on the firstborn of the Egyptians who died. But the Israelite firstborn were spared because their God had told them to put the blood of a lamb on their doorposts. Their God passed over the Jews, sparing them. And one of the men laughed at the story, and he said that he must try this sometime to save him from Roman garrison food. The centurion did not find this amusing and cautioned all of us to hold our tongues because Jerusalem would have literally millions of Jews coming to it for this festival. And he warned that a statement like that could start a riot. The man that did that would personally have to answer to Pilate and to Caesar. As we marched into Jerusalem, I couldn't help but notice what a far distant country this was to Rome. Hot, dry, nearly a wasteland. I could not imagine what in the world Caesar would want with such a place as this. Upon entering the gates, we saw throngs of people. There was a buzz in the air. There was an excitement. Yet the people looked at us with hate and contempt. I could tell this was not going to be the festival that I had hoped for. We'd not been long in Jerusalem when we were assigned to the patrol of the streets. On several patrols, we kept hearing people talk about something called a Messiah, a holy anointed king of the Jews. Well, Dad, I'm sure you're laughing right now, and we were too. We scoffed at such a nonsense, for surely no one would dare claim themselves a king of a conquered nation by the Roman Empire. We've been in Jerusalem, perhaps a week or better, when Cornelius, our centurion, excitedly came into the entire legion and ordered us to march at once to a road that sat between Jerusalem and a village called Bethphage. We had just gotten out of the city gates when we saw a huge crowd of people lining the road. There must have been thousands of people, and they were waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna," and "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The crowd cheered and waved. Mom, you'd have thought that Julius Caesar himself were coming. But we could not see this one that the crowd cheered so wildly for. Cornelius gave us orders for all of us to form up ranks and along the road behind the Jewish people celebrating. He had only to give the order, and we could have immediately seized control of the situation. However, our orders were to just be ready and observe. As the procession passed us, it was as if the Jews didn't even realize that the mightiest army on earth was standing right behind them. All they could do was cheer and shout for this one that was riding a donkey. Yeah, that's right, a donkey. No Caesar would dare embarrass himself by doing such a thing. But this one was different. The procession of the man riding this donkey, and I'm guessing probably 12 men, with all of the people accompanying them, were walking, and they were coming, and the crowd was cheering, and it was like something right out of Rome. You really should have seen it. It was an incredible sight to see. But then, just abruptly, the whole thing came to a stop. And it was right in front of my position. I got a knot in my throat, and I wondered, what next? But I asked the man who was standing next to me, "Who is this man?" And he said excitedly, "He is the Messiah." Before he could get the words out, some man dressed in bright colored and very expensive clothing, I'm guessing that he was some kind of a Jewish religious leader. I think they call them Pharisees. Came out and approached this man on the donkey. He said something very heated to this Messiah. I really couldn't hear what he said. Something about rebuking his disciples. But when he said this, all of a sudden the cheering stopped. There was no more waving of palm branches, and everything grew eerily quiet. I grabbed my sword. I knew something bad was about to happen. But you know, this rabbi, this Messiah person, whoever he was, calmly told this religious person that if his disciples and the crowd were to keep silent, that the rocks would cry out. I was astonished at such a statement. But the Pharisees, they left in a huff. And I thought to myself, man on the donkey, whatever you meant, it was pretty impressive because it put these guys in their place. Mom, then it happened. As I was admiring the whole situation and thinking about the courage of this man sitting on the donkey, that man, that Messiah person, he looked right at me. No, I don't mean the crowd. Mom, I mean he looked at me. Not any of the soldiers were around me. And Mom, those eyes, I will never forget those eyes. It was as if he could look right through you, right into your very soul. And in that instant, I felt a feeling of love, Mom, and a compassion like I have never felt before in my life. It was sort of like when you look at me, Mom, only it was 1,000 times more powerful. Then he smiled and he proceeded on. I can tell you from that point on, I was never the same. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floors. Even Octavio tried to sing me to sleep with a harp. It was horrible. But the laughter was welcome. I just could not get this man's face out of my mind. And those eyes in that smile, never have I seen anything like that. The next few days we continued with our patrols. But something was happening. The people were changing. The throngs that just a few days before, they were so excited and jubilant, were now subdued. Some were even angry. I asked Irenaeus, was it us? Was it the presence of so many Roman soldiers in this Jewish place? He agreed, and we decided that that's what it was. But we would soon find out that we were both terribly and tragically wrong. From time to time, while we were on patrol, we would see this Messiah and his disciples. And every time we did, he was always teaching them. I mean, it was like he never stopped. And I wondered, does he ever take a break? Do these men ever get tired of following this man? One evening, our centurion again came into the garrison, and we were ordered to make ready for battle. And a small group of soldiers, including myself, we were dispatched to this place called the Mount of Olives. I think I heard some of the locals calling it Gethsemane. By the time we got to this garden, there was already this large group of people. I guess, Dad, it was kind of like an angry mob. And they were standing around this man and his disciples. For the first time, I heard his name. Jesus. Jesus. Incredibly, one of his own disciples had betrayed him and led him to a mob. Then in my amazement, we all watched as this betrayer walked up to him and kissed him on the cheek. I looked and I spoke to Anthony and I said, what manner of man would do this? His disciples watched in disbelief as Jesus said, Judas, Are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Son of Man. Those words sound so strange and so foreign, but yet to hear those words come out of Jesus' mouth was like having a hot branding iron placed upon your heart. Jesus, Messiah, Son of Man. Is that what he was? Whoever he was, he had now been betrayed by one of his own. There were more of these religious leaders standing around, and one of Jesus' disciples drew a sword and he cut the ear off of a high priest. And I knew that in an instant this mob was going to tear this man apart, and that our command would be to break this up, regardless of the cost. But instead, this man, this Messiah, this Jesus, he bent over and he picked up this man's ear. One of the very men that had just moments ago was screaming in his face. And Jesus took this ear and he put it back on the man's head, and it looked like it had never been cut off. Now I know what you're thinking. And now instead of a carnival trick or something that we might see in one of the temples, this was like nothing I had ever seen. And instead of an angry mob, these men all stood with their jaws open wide. Anthony was with me, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you see that? He put his ear back on, just like a magician." Before I even realized what I was saying, I grabbed Anthony and said, "Have you ever seen a magician or a sorcerer in all of Rome do anything like that?" Well, we thought it was over and the crowd would leave. But all of these religious leaders and these priests and these temple elders and all these others, they insisted that Jesus be arrested, and they took him away. All of us that were in the Roman guard thought this was rather odd, that they didn't arrest his disciples too. But you know they didn't. It was clear to all of us they only wanted Jesus. On our march back to the garrison, we wondered, why? Why this man Jesus? What had he done that was so wrong to be treated in such a way? Well, Mom and Dad, the following day we were in the training yard and we were repairing our weapons. Dad, I know you remember what that was like. And then we heard this call to prepare for battle again. We quickly assembled as we were trained to do, and Irenaeus and Anthony and myself were sent just inside the judgment hall of Pilate, where we could protect him and we could still see the crowd and hear the yelling. Yes, it wasn't cheering, Mom. It was yelling. It was a yelling with a hatred that I have scarcely can remember ever hearing. I first thought they were going to try to storm the garrison, but I thought surely they wouldn't be that foolish. For Cornelius had many trained archers on the roof, and Pilate needed only to give the word, and in the next instant it would be raining arrows. When I saw him, it was Jesus. And this mob had brought him to Pilate. From where I stood, I could see him. And he'd been struck in the face. I heard someone explain to Pilate that Jesus had been taken to the chief priest and examined, that they believed that this Jesus was attempting to pervert the entire Jewish nation and encouraging them to pay taxes to Caesar. I'd never heard anything like this from the people on the street while we were on patrol. Then one stepped up and told Pilate that Jesus had declared himself Christ the King. Man, Son of Man, Messiah, Christ the King. How many names does this man have? I knew this was not going to be good. Pilate so bitterly hated the Jews and everything about them. And he was under orders from Caesar himself to maintain peace and order. And Pilate would not stand for anyone or any would-be king to attempt to overthrow Rome. From where I stood, I heard Pilate examine Jesus himself. And Pilate asked him directly to his face. And he said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus' answer was amazing to me. He said, "It is as you say." The look on Jesus' face was powerful. He wasn't scared. He was looking into the face of the most powerful man on this part of the earth and never once flinched. It was amazing strength and amazing power and amazing courage. But as I stood on and as I continued to watch, he turned and he looked right at me again. And the look that I saw on his face was just like the look that I saw on that road. And he smiled. Pilate walked out and he told this crowd he could find no fault in this man. And when he had said that, you'll never believe what the crowd did. They burst in anger. I thought, how can this be? Is this the same people that just days before had cheered this man, their Messiah? Pilate sent Jesus to be tried by Herod. But Herod sent him back to us. Only Herod had put Jesus in this gorgeous purple robe. I thought, well, perhaps now they've come to their senses. But it was all clear to all of us in the garrison that the Jews were trying to force Pilate's hand to do something. Most of the men didn't really care. It was just sort of a form of amusement for them. This time the mob was larger, angrier. This time we knew what they wanted. They wanted Pilate to sentence this Jesus, this Messiah, this Son of Man, to die. Some of the soldiers spoke among themselves, asking, "I wonder what this man has done." Still others just wanted to get the execution over with so we could get on with our other duties. From where I stood, I could hear Pilate trying to negotiate with this crowd. He'd even offered a trade for this murderous scoundrel that we had just arrested just a few days before. This scoundrel named Barabbas. And he was a filthy lot and really needed Roman justice. But yet the crowd exploded and they said, "Give us Barabbas and crucify Jesus." Well, Pilate, as you can imagine, ordered Jesus to be beaten. And to be beaten brutally he was. I think Pilate was hoping to appease the crowd. And so he called out of our ranks Marcus Aurelius. You may have heard of him, Dad. They say he's one of the best with the flagrum in all the Roman army. I did not see the beating, and I have to tell you I'm thankful I didn't. Yet when they had brought Jesus back to Pilate, the men that did the beating, they laughed at him. They kicked him. They scorned him. They mocked him. One had even made this crown out of these jagged thorns out of some wretched plant that grows in this part of the world. It's a horrible looking thing, and the plant bears thorns the size of large nails. But yet they had fashioned this crown and they had beaten it onto his head. When they had brought him to Pilate, I could scarce recognize who it was. Today, Marcus Aurelius had lived up to his reputation. Pilate again tried to get the crowd to take Jesus. I'm not sure that he would have lived had they. But no, that didn't satisfy them. They called, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." Pilate finally gave in. And in front of the Jewish religious leaders, Dad, he did something so incredible only Pilate would do. He took a bowl and he washed his hands right in front of them. And then he threw water on them. And he said, this man's blood would not be upon him. And do you know, these same religious leaders gleefully accepted that condemnation. I was immediately dispatched to a place called Golgotha. I believe some called it Calvary. As I was preparing to march out, I saw Jesus. And they were strapping this heavy cross to his bloodied shoulders. I'm not sure if any of you all have ever seen a crucifixion. I hadn't. This was my first. In that second, as I walked past Jesus, as they laid this heavy timber across his bloody and mutilated shoulders, in that second, as I walked by, he looked straight at me again. And through the bloody mess that was now his face, I still saw those eyes. Those eyes. Even though he had been beaten beyond recognition, those eyes pierced right to my soul. And believe it or not, I felt the same love and the same compassion as I did each time before. I don't know how that's possible. And I wonder, after all of this, would any Roman dare be this way? Dad, those eyes, I just can't get past those eyes. At Golgotha, I was positioned on top of a hill. We had already hung 2 thieves, just common criminals, people that Pilate wanted to get out of the way. But a spot was left in the middle for Christ. One of the other centurions thought that it would be rather humorous and rather fitting to hang the king of the Jews between 2 criminals to die. For some reason, I didn't see the humor in it. I watched as Jesus was thrown to the ground and like a piece of beef thrown onto the cross. Marcus Aurelius was there, sure not to miss any of this. And with a sledgehammer and spikes, he first drove them through each of Jesus' hands. My heart stopped. And with each strike of the hammer, I wondered if I would breathe again. Then Marcus grabbed Jesus' legs and he placed his feet, one on top of the other, on the cross, and then drove a spike through both feet. Marcus seemed to take great joy in this horrible cruelty. I noticed even the centurion, Cornelius, looked away. Yet through all that pain and that torment, Jesus never once, not one time, did He curse any of us. He only looked upon us with a sort of pity in His eyes. Those incredible, loving eyes. Dad, as Jesus hung on that cross, I had to wonder, what happened? How did we get from a triumphal parade and a celebration to this? Was Jesus really the King of the Jews? Was He really the Messiah? Was He really the Son of Man? Or was He just a political figure that got caught between Pilate and the temple? I watched His blood flow down the wooden cross. At the base, I could see it pooling. As I looked and as I watched His life flow, I saw my own comrades who had taken Jesus' clothes and were gambling for it. There were those that were spitting on Him, those that cursed Him. Some of the soldiers were mocking Him, and some were even offering Him sour wine. As beaten and near death as Jesus was, I heard the most astonishing thing I have ever heard in all of my life. As He hung on the cross, He began to pray. Not like we pray in Rome. No, this was a prayer unlike anything I had ever heard. It was very personal. It was very direct. And Jesus, as He hung on that cross, prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Dad, how is this possible? How is it possible to experience the horror and the cruelty and the beating and now near death and be able to forgive the very people that are doing this to you? I remember once I couldn't forgive somebody for simply hitting me with a rock when I was young. How could this one forgive those of us that have brutally beaten him, spat on him, mocked him, and yes, we were about to kill him? I thought to myself, this is not humanly possible to forgive like this. Then one of the two thieves hanging on the cross, even he had the gall to mock Jesus. Why? What had Jesus done to him? But the other thief silenced him and begged Jesus to remember him in His kingdom. A kingdom that he called heaven. Heaven. Though he could barely get the words out, Christ told this thief that today you will be with me in paradise. This just sent the priest into a full rage. We were finally in the 6th hour of the day. And I had heard later that this veil, this thing that hangs in the Jews' temple, it ripped, but no one did it. And then it got really dark, really strangely dark. You could hear your heart pounding in your chest. And everyone that was standing on that hill was now stone silent. Then Jesus, this Messiah, this Son of Man, with a loud cry said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It is finished." And yes, Mom, he died. All of a sudden, I saw Cornelius, the centurion whom I loved so much, that big monster of a man fall to his knees. His arms were outstretched to the sky. And looking up to heaven, he shouted, "Surely this was the Son of God." The earth began to shake violently, and we all thought we were going to die. Some of the soldiers were calling out to our Roman gods, but it did nothing to stop the ground from shaking. But then, just as quickly, it stopped. After the men made sure all were dead, Jesus' body was given over to this man named Joseph. One of the soldiers said that he was from some place called Arimathea, and they placed him in a rock tomb. By now, we were all exhausted. But the religious leaders, they wouldn't leave it alone. They went back to Pilate, and they convinced him that Jesus' followers were going to try to steal his body. And I thought to myself, what a laugh. Not all of them together could handle Marcus Aurelius. Fresh soldiers still were dispatched to guard the tomb and to place Pilate's own personal seal on it. It would have been absolute suicide to break into this tomb. Back at the garrison, we were allowed some rest. All of us that had been to Calvary were shaken. Some men even refused to speak of it. Still others told tales that they had heard about how this Jesus said he would rise from the dead on the third day. That last night, it was my turn to be at the tomb on guard. Irenaeus and Anthony had been on guard the night before. They said it was pretty dull and boring, and what a waste of time Pilate had committed them to. It was a fool's errand. I was there with a large group of soldiers. Many complained of standing around a tomb and thought, what folly is this? During the morning, we were telling tales and standing around when this great light burst from the tomb. And this large, massive stone rolled away by itself. We all froze in our place. All of us, crack soldiers, battle-hardened. And we were all afraid for our life. None of us could move. And just like that, he was gone. The tomb was empty. And on top of the stone sat this angel. Or at least that's what they tell me he was. Mom, he was so beautiful to look at. He was so gorgeous. And as I looked upon him, though I was frozen with fright, somehow I felt the same peace, that same love that I saw in Jesus' eyes. Yes, I'm not making this up. You heard me right. I'm telling you here and now that this Jesus was truly the Messiah. He truly was the Son of God, and he truly did rise from the grave. I give testament to that. And this is why I must write you now. You see, after all I have seen, and all I have witnessed, after seeing those incredible eyes, I now know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. I can do nothing else, nor do I want to do anything else, but to give my life to him. I understand now that he died on that cross for me. And he died on that cross for you, Mom, and for you, Dad, and for my brother and my sister. For me to believe anything else after what I have seen would simply be believing a lie. Therefore, Mom and Dad, I must tell you, I have surrendered my Roman uniform, and I have surrendered my loyalty to Caesar, and I have given my life to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. They call us Christians, and Pilate so fears followers of Jesus. I'll not be able to write you again, and I will likely not see you again in this life. Please know that I love you, Mom. And Dad, I love you too. And please give my brother and my sister a kiss for me. I pray as I write this that you too will consider what I have told you, and that you too will surrender your life to Jesus. If you will do that, I know that I will see you again one day in heaven. Mom, now, please don't cry for me. And Dad, please know that I was a good Roman soldier. But now I serve something much greater and much larger. Please understand that nothing will ever be the same again in this world. Please understand that I love you both. And I know that so does Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. My hope as you read this letter is that you'll follow Jesus. And one day, we will all be together again with Him in heaven. Your loving son, Gaius.